If you die, who gets your digital property, like your passwords? Delaware is the first state in the union to deal with this issue. The Delaware 87ers. Never heard of them? They're a pro team right here in Delaware. And the Delaware curse when it comes to the pageants. These are the topics we're dealing with today, and this is the Delaware Way. I'm Larry Menti. Welcome to the Delaware Way. We have an issue today that chances are you haven't thought about it. I know I didn't think about it until I just heard about it a couple of days ago. If you have a loved one die, a spouse, a parent, who gets those digital assets? Can you access their social media accounts? Can you access their computers? The passwords, who do they belong to? It's an interesting question. You might assume they belong to you or to the estate. That's not necessarily true. Jeff Mordock is a reporter at Delaware Law Weekly, and he's been covering this story because, explain, Delaware's the first state in the union to comprehensively address this issue.
That's right, Larry. There are 7 states right now that have laws similar to what Delaware has adopted, but none of them are as comprehensive as Delaware. Pennsylvania right now does not have a law. New Jersey, the law is proposed. It has not been amended.
Explain the Delaware law.
Well, the Delaware law is more comprehensive because the other 7 states that have similar legislation, those states, it limits who can access the digital assets. So in those states, sometimes it may just be power of attorney, it may be executor when you pass. Under the Delaware law, there's no limit to who can access it as long as you specify that person in your will. So it can be power of attorney, it can be a loved one that you just bequeath in your will, it can be your executor. Also, a lot of those other states, the law is only limited to email accounts or even social media accounts. The Delaware law goes one step further, and that is any digital asset on your computer. So if you're an author working on a manuscript, if you're an engineer and you have plans, or an architect and you have a building design, all of that's considered a digital asset under this law, and you can choose how that's handled in your passing.
And in most states, the family could lose that.
That's exactly right. In Delaware, it gives the family access to this, which is now an issue as increasingly things are stored online. I know most of my important materials are stored online. And what I think is going to be interesting to see now is some of the internet companies are opposing this law under privacy issues and security issues. They don't want to be liable if a fiduciary accesses this law and uses it for a way to either increase their financial gain or another way that may not be what the deceased intended.
It brings up so many issues, but first of all, name names. Who's fighting it? Google? Yahoo?
Google is fighting it. Yahoo is fighting it. As a matter of fact, Yahoo came out just the other day and announced that they feel this law conflicts with their user agreement. Under their user agreement, which is the small print nobody reads when they sign up for a Yahoo account, but under the user agreement for Yahoo, it states that your account will be terminated upon your death.
So they don't claim ownership of the material, they just stop the account altogether.
They just stop the account altogether. And that's raising some issues as well. In Virginia, for example, there's a very sad story about a 16-year-old boy who committed suicide. And his family has been trying to access both his Facebook account and his Yahoo account to try to find out if there's something in those communications that would give them some insight into what happened or why he took the path that he did. Since there is no digital asset law in Virginia, they're fighting right now to get, they're fighting in court right now to get access to their son's internet accounts.
And it wouldn't even have to be something like that, a tragedy or something that awful. I mean, if your father dies and he had some great writings, let's just say on Twitter or on Facebook, you want to save that as a memory, and you lose that in most states. And the interesting thing, and correct me if I'm ever wrong when I say this kind of stuff, but in Delaware, you would still lose it, right, if they don't bequeath it to you?
That's exactly right. Now, under the Delaware law, it creates a method for access. It does not automatically grant access. So you can bequeath it, and you can also specify that you want your Facebook account shut down, or you want your Yahoo account shut down, and that's the end of it. But a lot of people have stuff on their Yahoo accounts or their Google accounts that they want, that their executor needs access to. For example, a lot of people pay their mortgage through their online accounts.
Right.
A lot of people, I know one of the impetuses for this bill was there was a woman in Delaware whose father died suddenly. He had some trips planned, and she couldn't access his email to cancel those trips.
That's amazing. It's just something you don't even think of until this happens. But with most things, like for instance, my home, if I don't put that in the will, it still goes to the estate. Under state law, that's still going to go to my kids. You're saying, even in Delaware, if you don't, and in most states it doesn't matter, you're not going to get it anyway, unless you say specifically, I want this person to have my digital assets. Is it lost? Where does it go?
It is lost. It's up to whoever your internet content provider is to decide what they want to do with it. Like I was saying, Yahoo came out the other day and said that this Delaware law conflicts with their service agreement, so Yahoo would shut it down. As for the other internet providers like AOL or Google, I'm not sure what their specific policy
in Pennsylvania and Delaware right now, unless, even if it is written, even if it is in a will, they're not getting it.
Well, if it is in a will, they can access it, but the internet providers are really under no obligation to provide this. This is what is most interesting to me about this law. There's a federal law that goes back to 1986. It's called the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, or ECPA.
Okay.
Under the ECPA, it is unlawful for internet content providers or any provider of electronic communications to transmit electronic documents, pictures, images without consent of the user. But it's never been decided whether email is a protected communication under the ECPA. There was a lawsuit up in Massachusetts that dealt with this issue, and it kind of went around the court system. There were a couple conflicting decisions, and then the case was dropped without it ever deciding whether or not email is protected under the ECPA.
And correct me if I'm wrong in this, so what you're saying is, even though Delaware passed a law and 7 states have passed similar laws, not as comprehensive, but similar laws, it really isn't decided yet.
That's correct. We're going to need a court decision from the federal courts to determine the scope of this Delaware law.
Do you believe that Pennsylvania and New Jersey should do something about this, or is it kind of a moot point because it has to be decided by the courts anyway?
I think Pennsylvania and New Jersey should do something, because I think there needs to be something in place. Right now in those states, if you pass, there's no protections, there's no control, there's no way to, I mean, you can specify it in a will, but the question is how much legal weight will that have in those states? And that raises, that will result in some more court cases in those states. So they need to do something, but the Delaware law is not a perfect law. And I don't know how they can go about and address some of the deficiencies that we find in the Delaware law. Like I said, the example of going through and seeing every email that you've ever sent.
Jeff Mordock from the Delaware Law Weekly, I thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Thank you, Larry.
And explaining this. Wow, it is truly eye-opening.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
We're going to talk to the president of the Delaware 87ers.